Hi, everyone. I'm Devon Coombs, CPA, MBA, ex-Google and Deloitte, and lecturer at San Jose State. Today, I'm going to be covering Law 4 from my book, The 10 Laws of Finance. Accuracy emerges from error. And what I'm really going to try to get through is how you all have a superpower that you're not aware of. The ability to travel through time, and that you could refine that superpower through practicing the concept of finance called forecasting. So I'm going to walk you through the concepts here, and then I'm going to go through the technical lens in the next video. So you have a superpower. Part of being human is you can project yourself into possible futures and then kill those futures off if you don't like the potential outcomes. Most of us learn this when we start dating. And so when you start dating, you might be really excited to meet somebody. And you might run through multiple scenarios in your head about how you might approach that person in order to have an optimal outcome, that they actually say yes to the date with you. And a lot of people think of this grand romantic gesture, like you go up to them and say, hey, I've been noticing you for so long now, and I'm crazily in love with you, and I think we can get married and have a future together. And if you watch a lot of rom-coms, that might be what you think is the right approach. But you'll probably learn quickly that you'll probably freak somebody out if you do that. And you might kill off that future, but then that future doesn't work out because someone else approaches them. And then you eventually learn that, okay, if I act cool and try to show interest in them for the things that they're interested in and listen to them and go to shared events or outings that they go to, maybe we'll have a real connection, and then I'll ask them out. So you're able to imagine all of those things before you actually ask out the person. And that's your superpower, and that's the superpower of being human. You're able to project yourself into possible futures, travel through the imagined outcomes, and then kill off the bad outcomes. People who are wise are the people who are able to look at all the potential futures and choose the best one for themselves and kill off the bad ones. That's why as you get more mature, as you get older, you tend to make better decisions. You have experience through either living it yourself or learning through other people's stories or reading through books on what works versus what doesn't work. Problem is we misuse the superpower in very predictable ways. So that example of that grand romantic gesture, if you're only consuming rom-coms or you're only consuming romantic movies, you might unconsciously decide that that's the right approach, even when it's the wrong approach. There's a lot of these little traps that we can avoid once you understand them conceptually, because your mental models are really a personal narrative library, and they're filled with borrowed and unexamined stories. After watching this video, I hope you can examine them closer and see if they actually are accurate and represent real futures that you could live out beneficially, or you realize that they're just stories and that they're not something that you'd want to replicate. Every stage of our lives has its own version of touching a socket. You can think about little kids. You always tell them, don't put your finger in the electric socket. It seems silly as an adult, but the little kid doesn't have an experience. They don't know that electric sockets are dangerous. And so that's a perfect example for your ability to time travel into the future. Once you've watched a show about someone getting shocked or a cartoon, you can understand that it's actually dangerous. But some kids have to experience it for themselves. They put their finger in the electric socket and go to the doctor. Every stage has its own version of this. As we get older, we hope we can identify these versions so we can not make the same mistakes other people make. Teenagers might experiment with toxic relationships when they don't know the consequences of codependence or dependent relationships or abusive relationships, which is very sad. Well, as we get older, you start to learn those problems and you tend to avoid them more. Young professionals tend to take on crushing debt or trade options or crypto when they don't really have a lot of money yet, and then it stunts them the rest of their life by taking on huge student loans or taking on credit card debt to go on big trips. They're stunted the rest of their life because they can't invest. They didn't see a good model. They just saw TV or shows of people living it up as soon as they got their first jobs or went to college, and they copied the wrong story. Older adults do this too. A lot of my friends around midlife tend to have midlife crises after decades in careers that they really didn't want because they decided they want to provide for their families. And after 20 years of doing that, once they hit their mid-40s, they really start to resent it, and they might make mistakes that damage their families or mistakes that damage their relationships or careers because they never really made a choice for themselves. They just copied what they saw successful adults in their circles do. Here's what most people miss though, is you don't have to live any of these futures. You don't have to touch that socket yourself. You can learn from other people, and there's some tools you can use that are predictable and successful in getting away from these tragic outcomes. Once you understand the kryptonites to your superpower, once you understand the challenges that we have as humans, with regards to predicting the future, then we are more equipped to get around those negative outcomes. We're going to be more aware of the hole in the ground. So we're going to look down before we make the step so we can avoid the hole. The first one is time horizon distortion. In the short term, we overestimate what we're able to accomplish. So we tend to be worse performers in short term. And then we underestimate what we're able to accomplish in the long term because we really don't understand exponential equations as humans. We think in linear ways. while the world works in a lot of ways exponentially. There's pain point misdiagnosis. So a lot of times we don't take the time to reflect what's actually causing us the pain in the moment. And if we misidentify the pain, then we aren't able to solve for the future outcome. So going back to the romantic relationships, you might be feeling lonely and you might think that you need a romantic partner to fill that loneliness. That might be a misdiagnosis of the actual real pain point. A lot of times when we're bored, we might equate boredom with loneliness. If we equate boredom with loneliness and then we start dating in order to solve the loneliness factor when we're really just bored because we have no hobbies, we're going to solve the wrong pain point. And then when we do that, we predict the wrong future, where then we wind up in the future and we say, hey, I got in this relationship, but now I'm still bored with my free time. We're actually never really solving the real problem. And so first you want to take that time to really identify what the real problem is, which is that whole first part of my book, identifying where you are. The next part is you might mismatch the solution to the pain point. If you're lonely, you might think the relationship is solving the pain point for loneliness. And maybe it will, partially. But the real solution might be that you need to get out there and be with your friends again and get in community or join a local church or club, and that you haven't invested in any real relationships in a long time, and you actually have to work on yourself a little bit. And so the solution to the pain point of loneliness might be picking up hobbies and getting back into community and building friendships. It might not be getting in a long-term relationship. And you can imagine how that could go wrong is you could wind up 3 years later in this relationship and realize that you have no friends and you're still lonely. And then you could judge the relationship there. You could wind up in the wrong future by matching the wrong solution to the right problem. The last is, how do you measure that success? How do you quantify if you're tracking towards your goals? And you can see how that would be challenging from a loneliness perspective. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to get in a great long-term relationship, or I'm going to get engaged in the next year. I've actually had friends that had kind of make those goals for themselves. And that's really challenging because it's an output goal that you really don't have control over. More input-focused goals are things you have control over, like I'm going to go to 3 public meetings a week, or I'm going to try to go on 1 date a week, or something like that is a better way to measure. So if you're measuring the wrong outcomes, you might be disappointed. And so, for example, many of my friends who started the dating scene are really disappointed in that first year, especially when they're measuring against the wrong outcome. But 10 years later, most of them are married and far exceed their desired goals in the first place. A lot of them are married with kids and successful relationships. And they're really putting the effort in, putting themselves out there, working on themselves and working on building a community. It turns out most of the world and most things we work on work in exponential functions, meaning what we are doing over the next year won't accurately represent how much success we'll have over a 10-year time horizon or 20-year time horizon. We often overestimate what we're able to accomplish in a year, but underestimate drastically what we're able to accomplish in 10 years of consistency. To make sure that we avoid this, we just need to understand exponential functions. We need to understand that in the short term, things will hurt. A person who starts running for the first time every single week, they're not going to see a lot of progress in that first 3 months or even that first year. But if they hold steady for 10 years, they might be running marathons at pretty elite paces as long as everything's working out and they stay consistent. And so that person 10 years in the future is going to look very different than that person now. But that first year or two is really tough. And so you need to be focused on short-term habits, or I'd call input goals, rather than output goals. The way that we can really focus on this to get a framework away from all these kryptonites is what I call the MARCS framework. This is pretty similar to the SMART framework, but it has my own spin on it. So you get away from these time horizon issues. So first, you would want to make sure that whatever you're doing is measurable. I like finances because I'm a CPA and an MBA and I work in finance. But for measurements, dollars are always a beautiful thing. If you're doing exercise, it might be time. You want to look at something that's input-based or something that you can truly assign a value to. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So once you have the measurement in place, let's say I'm going to save an additional $50,000 a year, you want to make sure that that goal is both aspirational yet realistic. So that's the AR in the framework. And so aspirational but realistic. Most of the time, there's a range of outcomes. Especially when we're predicting the future, there's a range of outcomes. From a worst case scenario, we call that the bear case. And then a best case scenario, that's called the bull case. And then there's something in the middle, which we call the base case. I want you to take a realistic range. What is that realistic range? And take the upper end of it. And so that's what I'd call the aspirational but realistic. So if I'm running a business, I'm not going to set a goal of 300% revenue increase year over year. I'm going to look at what is realistic for my business, but also aspirational. So if maybe on the low end is 0%, base case is 15%, if it's growing 15% year over year. And then I'll say, I've had a few years where I can do 30%, and I think I can really push for 30%. I'll anchor to the 30% as my goal. So I can really push myself, but it's not outside the realm of possibility like the 300%. The next step that most people miss is properly sequencing goals. So what do I mean by proper sequencing goals? I can't tell you how many times I have this with students. Or a student will come to me and say, hey, Devin, should I start studying for my CPA exam right now? But you're a junior in college and haven't finished your intermediate accounting courses. My answer is no, you shouldn't. You need to finish college first. I had a high school student once ask me what residencies they should go to when they become a doctor. And I was like, well, first you need to pass your SATs. Then you need to get admitted into college. Then you need to do well in college and get in a pre-med program and then find an appropriate postgraduate program. Then you need to find residencies and you need to do all the tests along the way. So you're not there yet. It's not an appropriately sequenced goal. And I see it too often with too many people where they jump to, I want to have $1 million business. And I need to remind them, well, you need to make your first sale. And then the last part is you want to make sure it's controllable. Too many people set goals that are completely outside of their control. I want to get engaged in the next year. Well, you don't know if someone's going to say yes. What can you control though? Well, I'm going to go to 3 community outings every single week. That's something within your control. Or I'm going to take care of myself and get in better shape. I'm going to eat less, or I'm going to exercise more. Those are things within your control. If they aren't within your control, it's not an appropriate goal for you. You should let go of the outcomes and focus on the inputs. So here's what everyone misses though. So once you set a goal, what do you do afterwards? You're not going to get better at time traveling if you just are aware of your kryptonites, but you don't actually figure out how to get better at predicting the future. It's a skill. You need to practice it. You need to practice avoiding all of these pitfalls and actually practice getting better at predicting the future. The coolest thing about finance is we have a model in order to do this. What you need to do is actually write down your goals in the first place. And you can think of that as setting a forecast based on your MARCS goals. Then you act. So you live out what you were planning. So, hey, I'm planning on making $30,000 in sales. Go do the sales. That's your goal. Go do them. After that, give it a month and see, did you do the sales? What were the actual results? What was the difference between your goal, your forecast, and the actual results? Then try to learn something from it. Did you put enough effort in? Did you misdiagnose the market? What went wrong? Then you update your next forecast and do it all over again. And you keep going through this cycle, and that cycle will lead to more accuracy over time. And so some people are way better at this than other people. I'm proud of myself. I've been able to get forecasts down to less than a 1% variance in a lot of different cases because I've practiced this skill a lot of times. While I've seen people set a forecast for a budget or set a forecast for a project and be off by hundreds of percent when they first start because they're learning the skill. So I'm going to walk you through what this looks like in practice from my personal finance lens, from how my income was, from what I originally projected when I was homeless. So when I was homeless, I was trying to make at least enough money to afford going through college. And I remember having a dream that I'd make a 6-figure income someday. It was just my dream that I'd have a 6-figure income and I could afford a nice apartment to raise a family in Los Angeles. And I didn't realize the power of the tools that I'm showing you all because I started forecasting. I'd say, I'm going to try to make $24,000 this year. And you know what? From 2012 to 2013, I actually made less. I actually really struggled as I was trying to get my footings from being homeless and losing my recording studio. And you can see that actually from 2012 through 2015, I barely hit my goals of trying to increase my revenue just by a little bit every single year. I really didn't make as much progress as I wanted. But I started getting that exponential curve after about 5 years in 2016, 2017. What really unlocked that for me was because I was doing the forecast versus actual at a very regular basis. On a monthly basis, I would look at my numbers, what I wanted to hit and what I didn't hit, and what were the drivers for hitting the numbers and what was making me struggle. What I learned was some really big levers impacted my life. Moving to the Bay Area, moving to a high cost of living area where the job market was good really helped me out. Getting my CPA license and getting a full-time offer at Deloitte and starting to build my professional reputation in finance, then joining a major tech company, making sure I was in the high-tech industry. All of those things compounded because I was able to constantly look at my forecast and my actuals and see what the drivers were. And I was shocked. It took me just 10 years to more than double my goal. So I was at Google with an over $400,000 total compensation package after 10 years from being homeless. My original goal was just to have a 6-figure income. I was able to blow past that because I practiced all the tools that I'm presenting here. It's also just illustrate how bad I was at predicting the future initially because of that exponential curve. You can see here just an example of some of those big misses and where I learned. So like I missed the forecast originally at 24%. Because things are harder than they look on paper when you start off. It's always going to be tough to get that flywheel going and to get better at forecast versus actual, but that's where you learn. that forecast around 2015 to 2018. I started beating it because I underestimated the power of moving to the Bay Area and really big companies and that dedicated compounding of my own income and saving and investing. Then I just obliterated that forecast because I kept on working on my flawed assumptions and getting better and better at making money, essentially. That's really it. Correction creates accuracy. So you can think of this as like you're navigating on the ocean with a old boat, and you can't plot the perfect course at the beginning because the ocean's steering you each and every day in its own ways. You're not fully in control of the situation. What you can do, though, is wake up every single day, make small adjustments based off of the map and your compass, and you will eventually get to your destination. If you don't, you'll wind up somewhere completely different. And so the people that seem like they're gliding through life aren't the ones that have avoided mistakes. They've just gotten really good at correcting themselves when they have made mistakes, just like that boat. So they wind up at the destination. They know where they are, they know where they want to go, and then they make those accurate, properly sequenced corrections while they're moving through and navigating through the ocean. Your future isn't a mystery. It's just a series of corrections you haven't yet made. And so your first steps here are to diagnose the pain. What number is not working for you? What isn't working in your life? What is a real pain point? Make sure you get the real pain point and try to map the real solution to it. Then define the measurable, controllable, properly sequenced next steps to get over that pain point, to map that solution. Then create a 1-year forecast or a monthly forecast or a quarterly forecast to write down your assumptions and then track against it and see what you need to correct. The more frequently you do this, the better you'll get at your superpower of predicting the future, and that could just have a huge impact on your life. I hope you have found this video helpful. I hope you understand the importance of forecasts versus actual in your everyday life. And in this next video, we're going to talk about the more technical nuances and use cases in business. Thank you and bye-bye.